there was nothing heroic about the father of his country. To be fair, Washington is only 22. Ambitious and a little naive, he doesn't realize he's about to become a pawn in a chess game he doesn't understand.
They are here.
Washington's orders are to drive the French from this contested part of the frontier, with force if necessary. He doesn't know these French soldiers are on a diplomatic mission. The eager young major doesn't take the time to find out what the French are after.
Fire!
It's George Washington's first taste of battle, and he likes it.
I can, with truth, assure you that I heard the bullets whistle. And believe me, there was something charming in the sound.
Ne tirez pas! Ne tirez pas! Arrêtez!
The retreat cut off by Washington's Indian allies, the French surrender within minutes. Their officer sits wounded.
This is Ensign Joseph Coulon de Villiers de Jumonville. He's an envoy. Here's a letter from his commander.
I do not speak French.
Under the protocol of the day, Washington is responsible for the well-being of the wounded Frenchmen. But he soon realizes that this deep in the woods, different rules apply.
Tu n'es pas encore mort, mon père.
It turns out this Indian leader, known as the Half-King, has his own agenda. Within minutes, the Half-King's warriors plunder the French camp, scalping the dead and wounded before they leave. The massacre is not an outcome Washington expected, nor could he have foreseen the consequences. This incident will trigger an all-out war for North America that soon spreads around the world. We call it the French and Indian War. This is the story of a war that helped create a new nation no one could ever have predicted. This is the story of the war that made America. Washington's skirmish alone probably would not have triggered a larger war. But the cold-blooded murder of their wounded officer, the French couldn't possibly let that go without a response. Within weeks, the brother of the slain Ensign Jumonville sets off in pursuit. Meanwhile, Washington has withdrawn his men to a large meadow. They build a crude stockade that the Virginians wryly name Fort Necessity. Washington expects the Half-King to help defend the fort. But the Indian leader has lost confidence in the young major.
This Washington, he is a good-natured man. but he has no experience. Always driving us to fight by his direction. And now he wants us to make a stand with him against the French. And that little thing upon the meadow.
Washington's only Indian ally leaves.
We have no choice. We will make our stand here.
The French have no such problems with their native allies. They arrive accompanied by 100 Shawnee, Mingo, and Delaware warriors.
About 9 o'clock on the 3rd of July, the enemy advanced with shouts and dismal Indian yells.
Washington intends to fight face-to-face in the field, European style. But the French and their Indian allies don't cooperate.
They then, from every little rising tree, bush, stump, and stone, kept up a golden, constant fire, which we returned as best we could. Till late in the afternoon, when there fell the most tremendous rain that can be conceived. It filled our trenches with water and wet not only the ammunition and the firelocks, but also the few stores that we had, leaving us only a few bayonets for defense.
By nightfall, the situation is hopeless. When the French commander offers terms for surrender, Washington signs the soggy document. Unable to read French, he relies on a Dutch officer to translate. It turns out that Jumonville's brother is taking a sweet revenge. Washington doesn't learn until later that the document includes a confession to the assassination of Ensign Jumonville. The morning after the battle, the victorious French allowed Washington to retreat towards Virginia with his wounded and tattered troops. Word of his defeat spread quickly. This was not the kind of fame the young Washington had been seeking. The date, oddly enough, was the 4th of July, 1754. Across the Atlantic, in the Palace of Versailles, Louis XV and his ministers spend the winter of 1755 preparing to defend their North American interests. By the time the ice has melted on the St. Lawrence River, 1,800 French troops have been deployed to Canada. King George II and his ministers in Whitehall move even faster. 1,000 redcoats sail to Virginia in early spring of 1755. The British plan is to strike the French in the Ohio country and simultaneously in northern New York and Nova Scotia. A three-pronged attack that will drive the French back into Canada. War is now inevitable.
First, the troops I have the honor to command will take Fort Duquesne and thereby remove the French from the forks of the Ohio. Second,
it's an audacious strategy, in keeping with the commander-in-chief sent by London to carry it out. General Edward Braddock, a politically connected career officer with little battlefield experience.
once we have secured this important post, we shall proceed to Niagara, if the season will permit. And I suppose it will, for this Duquesne can hardly detain me above 3 or 4 days.
Fort Duquesne, Braddock's first objective is held by the French and their Indian allies. It stands guard at the crucial forks, controlling all traffic through the Ohio country. To assault it is an ambitious plan.
As I was saying, gentlemen,
But before he even begins, the general runs into political problems.
in North America, and he has given me.
Braddock expects the colonies to help pay for this military campaign.
Let me acquaint you with the.
But the governors of the colonies reply that their assemblies would prefer to be asked, not ordered.
Pish, gentlemen! You cannot tell me you have not the power to make these little assemblies do the king's will. The matter is urgent. There is no time to be lost. I need not remind each of you that this expedition is an expensive enterprise. I cannot sufficiently express my indignation against the provinces of Pennsylvania and Maryland who refuse to contribute anything. As for the Indians, these savages may indeed be a formidable enemy to raw American militia, but it is impossible they should make any impression against disciplined troops.
In June of 1755, Braddock's march to the Ohio country finally gets underway. A long, thin column of wagons, artillery, horses, and camp followers, 4 miles long. "300 axemen clear the way. It's a logistical feat that only the British would attempt. Marching an army through 100 miles of dense forest, steep mountains, and muddy river crossings. After a week, they have gone only 22 miles. Frustrated by the slow progress, Braddock splits his force and takes an advance column of 1,400 men ahead. It is Washington's third adventure into the Ohio Valley. This time, he hopes to finally drive the French out. The main body of the army escapes any direct attacks. Others aren't always so lucky. English messenger James Smith is captured far from the column and taken to the French fort Duquesne.
Move as fast as you can.
Running the gauntlet is customary for all Indian captives. Smith is turned over to the French. He'll wait to see whether the English will ever arrive at the fort. After 3 grueling weeks, the British Army finally approaches the Monongahela River, just a few miles south of Fort Duquesne. Morale is high. General Braddock has led his army nearly 100 miles. His engineers built log roads to cross the swamps. A company of sailors rigged block and tackle to hoist the heavy cannon over the hills. The worst is behind them. Once they reach the fort, nothing can stand in their way.
Won't be too much more now, will it?
It is my hope that this evening we will be drinking a toast at Fort Duquesne.
Braddock has succeeded in transporting a modern army and its artillery deep into the wilderness. Washington is impressed. This is the kind of British officer the young Virginian aspires to be. Indian scouts working with the French keep a close watch on the approaching army. When word reaches Fort Duquesne of the advancing British column, the French realize their only hope is to ambush the British as they cross the Monongahela River. But their Indian allies balk, unwilling to take on the large enemy force. The French captain Léonard de Beaujeu dons Indian war dress and paints his face, a gesture of solidarity the British would never consider. The Indians agree to join the fight. At the front of the British column, George Croyne, a Pennsylvania trader, leads the 7 remaining Indian scouts, moving quickly the last few miles toward Fort Duquesne. Captain Beaujeu's force of nearly 900 Indians, Canadians, and French regulars moves just as fast toward Braddock's column, still hoping to catch them at the river crossing. It's impossible to say who is more surprised when they encounter each other deep in the woods. The elite British Grenadiers move forward. Beaujeu leads the warriors and Canadians into the woods. He'll fight the battle the Indian way. In the beginning, it looks as if the highly disciplined British will prevail. Their volleys prove deadly immediately. Beaujeu is one of the first to fall. But once the Indians and Canadians slip into the hills on either side of the British, everything changes. Washington and the other officers struggle to keep their men in formation. The French regulars are deployed in front of the British column, blocking any forward movement. While the Indians and Canadians snipe at them from both sides. The British start to fall back, but on the narrow forest road, they collide with the troops behind them. Chaos ensues. Deadly tangles of redcoats mass together, making pathetically easy targets. The artillery proves useless in the dense woods.
Hold your
fight as the enemy does. We know the Indian mode.
Certainly not, sir. Mind your place.
The general's been hit!
It doesn't take long for the attackers to reach the rear of the British column. It is said that of the 54 women who marched with Braddock's army that day, only 4 returned.
Betsy! No! No!
Some of the missing would turn up in Canada, ransomed from the Indians by the French. After 3 harrowing hours, it's over. The French and Indians have lost only 21 dead, while nearly 1,000 British and provincial soldiers are killed or wounded. Washington has had several horses shot out from under him, but is unhurt. What's left of Braddock's army makes a desperate retreat.
The shocking scenes which presented themselves in this night's march are not to be described. The dead, the dying, the wounded, the groans, the lamentation, the cries of the wounded for help along the road were enough to pierce a heart of adamant. The folly and consequence of opposing compact bodies against the manner of the Indians fighting in the woods, which had in a manner been predicted, were now so clearly verified.
Word of the great Indian and French victory reaches Fort Duquesne by the end of the day. British prisoner James Smith reported the moment of the warriors' return.
At sundown, I beheld a small party coming in with about 12 prisoners. I stood on the fort wall until I beheld them begin to burn one of these men. They had him tied to a stake and kept touching him with firebrands.
Smith is sure he'll meet the same fate. Instead, he will be adopted by an Indian family to replace kin who have died in battle. He will spend the next 6 years living among the Indians. The French know they owe this victory to their native allies. The Indians gather the honors of battle to bring home evidence of their great feat. In European warfare, the victors might have pursued the fleeing British to crush them altogether. But here in North America, the native peoples have different aims. They're not fighting to secure an empire. They're just trying to drive the invaders from their land. For now, anyway, the battle is over. Five days into the retreat, General Braddock dies of his wounds.
At an encampment near the Great Meadows, The brave but unfortunate General Braddock breathed his last. He was interred with the honor of war. And it was left to me to see that performed. He was deposited in the road over which the army, wagons and all, passed to hide every trace, lest the entombment be discovered.
George Washington would admire Braddock's battlefield bravery for the rest of his life. The general's brass-barreled pistol and bloodied sash would hold a place of honor at Mount Vernon. For years after the Battle of the Monongahela, visitors here would come across the unburied bones of British and American soldiers. But empires don't come cheap. Both Britain and France would pay dearly in blood to win a prize as huge as North America. This was just the beginning. Neither side had any idea how costly this war would be, or how many battles there were still to lose. At the start of Braddock's campaign, Washington had volunteered as the general's aide. At the side of a master, he had glimpsed the art of strict military discipline.
Discipline is the soul of an army. It makes small numbers formidable, procures success to the weak and esteem to all.
It's discipline, Washington believes, that will turn his Virginia regiment into an elite fighting force. His men are a mix of immigrants and vagrants. Insubordination and desertion are rampant. Washington takes two deserters and decides to send a message to his troops by making their punishment a public spectacle. Your Honor will, I hope, excuse my hanging instead of shooting them, Washington later tells Virginia's governor. It conveys much more terror to the others. It was for example's sake that we did it. Washington was taking the discipline of the British Army as his model. He wanted to make his colonial soldiers as professional as redcoats, the best soldiers of his day. Not all colonials had the same ambition. Unlike Washington, New England officers did not admire the British Army's practice of discipline. They worried that if they were placed under direct British command, they could be flogged or hanged just like the redcoats were. For this reason, they took their enlistment contracts very seriously, as a guarantee that they would not be required to serve under any officers but their own. New Englanders argued that if the terms of their enlistments were violated, it would be grounds for them to dissolve the colonial army altogether. In July 1756, Lieutenant General John Campbell, the Earl of Loudon, arrives to take Braddock's place as Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's forces. Like Braddock, he expects colonial soldiers to serve under his command. He's in for a rude awakening. At his headquarters in Albany, Loudon is kept waiting, a new experience for his lordship.
Where is he?
Loudon has summoned the head of colonial forces, Major General John Winslow, to explain the New Englanders' stubbornness.
I desire to be informed by you whether the troops now raised by the several provinces and colonies of New England, and armed with His Majesty's arms, will, in obedience with His Majesty's commands, act in conjunction with His Majesty's troops under the command of myself, His Commander-in-Chief.
Your lordship may be assured that I shall ever be ready to obey your commands. My fellow officers are ready and willing to act in conjunction with His Majesty's troops and put themselves under your lordship's command, provided the terms and conditions of enlistment established and agreed upon be not altered. Your lordship must be informed that any alterations in the terms and conditions of the contract of enlistment will result in the dissolution of the army.
The only thing that will result in the dissolution of the army will be the insubordination of your forces. That will be all, sir. Good day.
My lord.
Loudon senses something larger is going on in America. He says in disgust, "I believe they would be looked on at home as little less than fomenters of rebellion." While Braddock was suffering defeat and Johnson's campaign was ending in stalemate, the British achieved military victory in Nova Scotia, formerly the French colony of Acadia. They drive French forces from the region. The British governor is determined to ensure that the territory remains securely in British hands. He orders the systematic expulsion of all French-speaking settlers from the region. Acadians, who had called the land home for a century, are dispossessed of their farms and fishing boats. Whole villages are emptied and families herded to the coast. The operation is carried out with chilling efficiency. Over the next 3 years, 10,000 of them are shipped to the British colonies. Many Acadians make their way to Louisiana, where they become known as Cajuns. The following year, Montcalm mounts an assault on Lake George. This time, 2,000 warriors go with him. In August 1757, 150 Indian canoes accompany an armada of French bateaux gliding down the lake. It's a formidable force. Along with the Indians are nearly 6,000 French regulars and Canadian militiamen. They are surging by land and water toward Fort William Henry, the fort William Johnson built after the Battle of Lake George. During the night of August 2nd, lookouts at the fort spot 3 large bonfires several miles up the shoreline. In the dawn light, lookouts begin to make out the oncoming armada. In the middle of the fleet, they see 30 pontoons, bateaux lashed together with planks, each carrying a heavy siege cannon or mortar. From the fort, the British realize Montcalm is setting up an encampment near the lakeshore. But they don't yet realize that an advance party, 3,000 strong, has already set up 2 more camps in the woods, close to the fort's provincial encampment and the fort itself. The British are surrounded. For the fort's commander, Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe, the situation is desperate. He writes to his superior, General Daniel Webb, imploring him to send more troops.
We know they have cannon. I make no doubt but that you'll soon send us reinforcement as soon as possible. The large French force nearby is planning to attack the fort. Without additional men from Webb, we can only hold out a few more days. This place was so suddenly surrounded. The French have not yet erected their batteries, but the Indians have been firing upon us from the woods all day.
Monroe's letter is delivered by courier to General Webb, 16 miles down the road at Fort Edward. Meanwhile, both sides gird for a classic European-style siege. Under a French red flag of truce, Montcalm's aide-de-camp, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, approaches Fort William Henry.
Compagnie! Halt!
To your commanding officer, from General Montcalm.
In accordance with European military protocol, Montcalm offers Monroe a chance to surrender before the battle begins. As leverage, he invokes the memory of the Indians' behavior at Fort Oswego.
I owe it to humanity to summon you to surrender. At present, I can restrain the natives and make them observe the terms of a capitulation, as I might not have the power to do under other circumstances. I demand a decisive answer within an hour.
Demand a decisive answer within an hour.
Still waiting for reinforcements from Webb, Monroe responds.
General Montcalm, I am especially obliged to you for the kind offers that you make me, but I cannot accept them. I am little afraid of barbarity.
Besides, I have under my orders soldiers who are determined, like myself, to die or conquer. We will fight to the last extremity.
Montcalm needs to get his cannons into firing range. He orders his troops to dig a network of trenches. 500 men work round the clock for 3 days, digging their way toward the fort. By daylight, Monroe's forces do what they can to disrupt the French efforts.
Handle cartridge! Charge, cartridge! Ram, cartridge! Drive! Advance the piece! Ready! Fire!
Monroe continues to expect news of reinforcements at any moment. The next day, General Webb finally returns the courier with his reply. Care had been taken to hide Webb's letter, but its discovery gives the French the upper hand. On the morning of August 6th, the siege opens as it had the previous 2 days, with the British bombardment directed at the French advance. But Montcalm's trenches are at last within range of the fort. This time, the French answer back with a burst of cannon and mortar rounds. From exposed positions just outside the fort walls, Indian snipers harass the British gunners. Casualties in the fort are mounting. The French artillery proves devastating. At one point, they hit the fort's flag. When a carpenter attempting to repair it is killed, the symbolism is not lost on either side. Montcalm chooses this moment to suspend the bombardment. He again sends Bougainville forward to propose the British surrender. Bougainville delivers Webb's blood-stained message found on the courier. Only then does Monroe learn that Webb thought it not prudent to send reinforcements. Instead, Webb had advised Monroe to get the best surrender terms possible.
From General Montcalm. I am sorry for you, sir. I hope General Webb's letter will persuade you to surrender the sooner.
I thank you, Captain Bougainville, for your politeness. You've been a most generous enemy. It has been my pleasure.
advance the peace!
For God's sake, fire!
According to the etiquette of siege warfare, Monroe can surrender with honor only after the fort's walls have been breached. With the walls losing timber, the fort's engineer reports to Monroe. The structure may not hold for long. More importantly, the morale of Monroe's men is shattered. Most have had little sleep for 5 days. Surrender is Monroe's only choice. Montcalm designs the terms of surrender to avoid repeating the events at Fort Oswego the year before. To prevent the Indians from taking captives, the British will be granted safe passage from the fort. Provisions and supplies will go to Canada. The British may keep their personal effects. The Indians can take what's left.
Montcalm gathered the war chiefs together. Then he told them he'd allow them none of the plunder or prisoners they expected. They listened politely, but they felt betrayed. Many had died fighting alongside their French allies, and they expected to return to their people with the honors of war.
Then Montcalm further insults the Indian code of honor by sitting down to a banquet with the defeated, to which they are not invited.
Gentlemen, a toast. To our worthy opponent.
That afternoon, British officers entertained their French counterparts with an impressive spread of delicacies, served with wine and beer. The Indians are quickly beginning to see a European conspiracy. At dawn on August 10th, the British regulars begin to leave, escorted by French grenadiers. Trailing the regulars is a long, disorganized line of colonial soldiers and camp followers. The Indians are not about to let what they felt they'd earned simply walk away.
The savages surrounded us, and even took my horse, which I had given to carry off the gun. The French advised giving up our effects, rather than dispute with the savages.
Hold your weapons, gentlemen. Offer no resistance. Surrender all your effects. Surrender all your effects, gentlemen. Offer no resistance.
Soldiers immediately delivered up everything to them. They took our hats and swords and began to strip us. This unexpected treatment, so contrary to the terms of the capitulation, struck so great a panic in the troops, who knew not where it would end.
But soldiers in the front are spared the worst of what comes next. New England troops at the back are set upon from every side. The killing, scalping, and looting lasts only a few minutes. When it was over, wildly exaggerated reports of 1,500 dead fueled outrage among New England colonists. The truth is, about 75 were killed. Of the 500 taken captive, many are ransomed back within a few days. Most of the Indians go home, disgusted and empty-handed, threatening to abandon the French. What should have been a resounding victory instead leaves Canada in crisis. Because if the French can't keep their Indian allies, they can't win the war for North America.